I want to thank one of my subs named Angela for giving me the idea to do a Halloween video, a Halloween true crime video. When we were talking in my live, I was like, well, what would be a good story? And she immediately said, In Cold Blood, the Clutter Family story. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that story in so long, and I thought it was so perfect. So, here we go. I am from Kansas. That's where I grew up. That's where my husband grew up. I'm pretty sure this was one of the very first true crime books I ever read, and it just scared the crap out of me, especially since I was living in Kansas when I read this and growing up there. I think I was pretty young when I read it, but I can't remember how young. But I've always been a book nerd, so I was reading like crazy from the age of 10 and up. So I was probably fairly young when I read it. I want to start this story by talking about the Clutter family as much as I could find about them. It's not easy to find things about them. I do want to say that I watched the documentary on Amazon in called Cold Blooded, the Clutter Family Murders. Oh, that's hard to say. So I some of this information I did get from there, and then other various articles, People Magazine. Some were obituaries that I found. I was digging pretty deep to try to find information on the surviving sisters, but it's not easy. Now, having been from Kansas, I get the whole Kansas attitude of not wanting to talk about it. This is a very Kansas thing to do. So I'm going to start out with Herb Clutter, the patriarch of the family. He was a very respected businessman. He was a wheat farmer. He had over 650 acres of wheat and an orchard. He was very well respected in the community, in his church. He was known as a man that would help anybody that people went to get advice from. Sounds like a lovely man, really. Another odd thing about this story was that he had bought a new insurance policy about a month before the murders. It was a policy that came with a double indemnity clause, which made the policy worth $40,000 to his surviving daughters. So when this initially happened, it gave the detectives some pause, like it would anybody. But they did find out that this policy had been in the works for months and months and wasn't anything spur of the moment. But I thought that was kind of an interesting little thing. He was found in the basement furnace room, bound, his throat cut, and shot to the head. Now, I did find a picture online where somebody went to an open house, and because there's a lot of talk about a blood stain on the basement wall that is from where he was shot. So this person took a picture of it, and I'm sure you can find it if you Google it, but there's no proof that that's what it is. And if you look at other pictures, there's a lot of stains on the walls. So, that's not uncommon in an old farmhouse. But it's kind of creepy. Next, we'll talk about Bonnie Clutter. She caused most of the controversy with Truman Capote and the family, her surviving daughters. They did not like at all the way he wrote about their mother. They felt like he greatly exaggerated her depression issues and that he made her come off much, much worse than what she really was. Another theory is that when Truman Capote and Lee Harper went to interview people that lived there, that some of them exaggerated her illness too out of jealousy. This family was very well known. They were known to be prosperous. But again, the surviving daughters say that Capote made them sound much more wealthier than what they really were. But there's no doubt they had a standing in the community and the name was well known. So you can see where there could be some jealousy. I kind of relate to this because I'm from a family that's very well known in Kansas. So I grew up with a lot of people thinking I was filthy rich just because of my last name. And people would be, especially in junior high, people started being mean to me just because of my name. So I get that, totally get it. I can see where that would happen if they would go to interview people, and some of these people might have been jealous and made her out to be much worse than she was. I can totally see that happening. Now, the flip side of that is other people will say these daughters were protecting their mother's reputation. That could be too. Nothing wrong with that. That a lot of her depression started after she had her first two children, which, as we know now, would be postpartum depression. But not much was known about that back then. Now, the thing I don't quite get, though, is they still kind of hint to that being her depression when she died. But her youngest son, Kenyon, was 15. So I don't see where that would be applicable. To me, that's too many years. It could have started as postpartum depression and gone on to something else, but I don't think you can blame that when he was 15 years old. The sad thing is, she had seen a new doctor shortly before her death who had told her that all her symptoms could be pegged on a back issue, an issue with her spine, and that she could have surgery to fix it. So people that were close to her said she was excited about this and thought this was going to cure her issue. It sounds kind of hokey now, but, back then, who knows? That could, very well have happened, and a doctor might have told her that. She was known as a great hostess and a great 4-H teacher. One thing I found going through their family history, even with these surviving daughters later, is their huge involvement with 4-H, which, again, when I was growing up in Kansas, is a very Kansas thing to do. But this continued on throughout their lives. I think both sisters were very involved in 4-H, and I suspect that their children are involved in 4-H, and it probably continues to this day. But like I said, there's not a whole lot of information you can find. Nancy Clutter was 16 when this happened. She was known as the town darling. Now, when I was watching the Amazon documentary, they had her cousin, who is very close to her. She was reading letters that Nancy had written her, and you can tell from her letters, she was very outgoing, very social, talking about all the parties she had been to, talking about her boyfriend, and that they were, she had promised him not to see other guys. So she guessed maybe they were going steady, which I thought was so cute. Such a 16-year-old thing to say, right? Here's the sad thing, though. They did some interviews with her boyfriend, Bob Rupp, and he said he was supposed to take her to the movies, the late night movie, Saturday night, but Nancy's father had talked him into going Friday night instead. So he sounds like this haunts him even to this day, that maybe if they hadn't changed their plans and he had taken her Saturday night, she would have lived, which just kind of breaks my heart. He sounds very sad to this day when you hear him in the interviews. He ended up being one of her pallbearers. Now, initially, he was looked at really strongly, as you can imagine, being the boyfriend. People said there was some animosity because his family was Catholic and the Clutters weren't. But other people say that isn't true, that Nancy's dad liked him and that he was around all the time and that he asked Nancy's dad for advice on things and that there was nothing, to that. But he did have to go in and take a polygraph test, which he passed and clearly passed the interview, and the detective said there was no way he had anything to do with it. But this is how this started. You have to check everybody close to the family first and then spread out from there. Kenyon was 15 at the time of the murders. He was the youngest. He's described as pretty much a loner. Not as outgoing as his sister, very mechanical, wanted to stay home and build gadgets and work on his car, and wasn't into girls yet. But at 15, you can see that, Most probably in another year, he would have changed his mind about girls. Other girls that were interviewed in the documentary said he was very handsome, very good looking. So the girls were definitely looking at him. But as we all know, girls mature quicker than boys at those ages. I guess he was kind of upset that his best friend had a girlfriend, so they weren't hanging out as much. So obviously his friend was maturing a little quicker than he was. But his friend described him also as a prankster and a guy with a great sense of humor. But that's about all I can find on him. There's not much on Kenyon. But I love the way they spelled his name because to me this is such an unusual name for back then, especially in Kansas. Growing up there, I never heard of anybody named Kenyon. And it's spelled Kenyon, which I think is just such a cool name. He was found in another room in the basement, bound and shot. The surviving daughters, you can find more about Beverly English because she's the only one that has ever talked or given, not really talked, I would say gave a few statements. Her other sister, Ivana, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I hope I am. I kept trying to find where somebody said her name. Ivana Mosier. I found her obituary. She passed away just a year ago. She was 83 years old, passed away October 5th, 2019. She sounds like such an interesting lady. They said she had a passion for teaching children. She was a 4-H leader for many years. See how that theme of 4-H goes. She also taught piano, preschool, Sunday school. But here's what I found so fascinating about her was she got her pilot's license in 1978 and learned how to fly a single-engine plane. Now think about that. In 1978, that would be a huge accomplishment for a woman, especially a woman in Kansas. So I got to admire that. They said she was so proud of that, and I can see why. And that because of that, a lot of her family's members ended up in the airline industry because of watching her. So I thought that was pretty cool. But other than that, I can't find a lot of information on her. So then we go on to her sister, Beverly English. She's a retired nurse. Her husband's a wheat farmer. There was a lot of controversy about her wedding. Her wedding was held 4 days after the funeral. I guess Capote in his book made a big deal out of that too. But here's the thing. Being from Kansas, I totally get why they did it. It's the sensible thing to do. The entire family, all the extended relatives were in town for the funerals. So the theory was, let's have the wedding while everybody's here. The second purpose was to change her last name. I think people knew how big this was going to be, even 4 days, even the week of the murders. Even though back then there was no internet, but they knew it was going to be a big deal. So they thought, let's have this wedding while all the family's here. Let's get her last name changed. So they did it. Now, if you go look at the wedding pictures, they're kind of somber for a wedding. And obviously, being 4 days after a funeral, you know why. Beverly said she also wanted to give her entire family a glimpse of joy in so much tragedy. But there's a couple of the close-up wedding pictures of her and her husband where they just look very sad. So it's kind of sad to me that she had to have her wedding that way. And I could see where some people might look at it and think, why would you do a wedding 4 days after half your family was wiped out? But I totally get it. I'm telling you, it's that Kansas mentality. Let's do it while the relatives are here. Let's get her last name changed. Yeah, I can totally see that happening. Beverly said she quit giving interviews because she gave interviews to Capote and he had promised her he would only use what they really said and that he wouldn't add to that or exaggerate and that he would portray her family as they really were. And she felt like he went back on that and greatly exaggerated, especially her mother's illnesses. So she felt that the whole family was really betrayed and exploited by Capote. So this is why from then on she would refuse any interviews because she said she couldn't trust anybody in the media. Sound familiar? And this was way back then. one of the quotes I thought was great of hers was, "It's their life I want to immortalize, not the way they died." So I totally get that. That's so sad that, all these years they have to go through, because this story has never died down. I don't think it ever will. So, yeah, still won't give any interviews to this day. I have not found an obituary for her, and she shows that she was alive when her sister died a year ago, so I would think she's still alive today. But you got to admire her that she hasn't backed off what she feels is right, and that was just stop giving interviews and talking about it because of what Capote had done to her, and she knew that if she gave other interviews, they would probably do the same thing and exaggerate things. And so you got to admire the woman for staying strong in her beliefs all these years. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the house itself, because the house is with 9.5 acres today. It is still almost exactly the same today, and there are people living in it. I've seen pictures from an open house that was in there, and the previous owner still had the same exact breakfast nook with a leather bench with a table, kind of like what you see in a trailer home. So I thought that was really interesting that they left that all exactly the way it was. I don't know if the owners now did the same thing. The house was designed and built by Herb and Bonnie. It was a state-of-the-art home at the time. It really was. It had 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths, which the bathroom alone, to have 2.5 baths back then was unheard of. Nobody had 2.5 baths. So this was really the crown jewel of this community, was this house that they built. And you can find pictures online of when they were building it. Kind of fascinating. Unfortunately, the house being built is what got them killed. Because the guy that was working for them, his name was Floyd Wells, and he was working for them when the house was being built. He said that one day, Mr. Clutter was paying for the lumber bill and told Floyd Wells that he had spent over $10,000 that day just paying for materials for the house. Now, everybody that knows this man said he always paid everything by check, never cash. But somehow Floyd Wells got it in his head that he had paid with cash from a safe in the home. And that was never true. And that was the story he ended up giving to the 2 killers that sent them on this path to break into their home and look for this money and kill them. So I think that's so sad that that's how this all evolved, was from him building this house. Now, the other people that owned the house previously their last name was Maters. They got so tired of people driving by their house and taking pictures that they started selling tours for $5 a ticket. And you could come on in the house and tour the house. I think they probably just gave in because they were so sick of it. Maybe they were like, well, let's make some money off of it. This went on for 2 years where they were selling the $5 ticket tours. Well, then they decided they would make it into a bed and breakfast and charge for that and then still do the tours. Well, when the neighbors found out, they put a kibosh on that. They were like, no, we're not having it. They were already upset by all the cars coming in that way, and some of the local authorities weren't happy with it, so they put an end to that. So then the house was put up for sale again. Now, I have read, and I tried to find the deed, but I couldn't find it, but I could find the tax information. But I have read that there is I can't think of the name now, but there is a part of the deed that says that this house can never be used for any commercial use, tours, or a bed or breakfast. So somebody had that written in, that house can never be used that way. Now, I did look on YouTube. There is a recent video from this year of somebody who drove out there and filmed the front of the house, which I feel so bad for these people. Can you imagine? They say people from all over the world go drive by this house. Now, this house is way out in the country, and you have to go down a really long dirt road to get to it, and it's the only thing there. So they know if you're coming down that road, you're coming to look at their house. So I do feel bad for the people that own it. But you'll see if you go see his video that they have like three big dogs running loose in the front. One was a German Shepherd and then a couple other big dogs. And they are very aggressive and they are very much protecting their property. So I would not want to go out there. I just think people should leave them alone. There's enough video and pictures of the house that nobody needs to go there. But it is amazing how much the house is exactly the same today as it was back then. At least the outside is. And like I said, when you look at the open house pictures from a few years ago, and that wasn't too long ago, you know, everything in there was pretty much the same. Beautiful house. Even today, it's a beautiful house. But it still kind of breaks my heart that him building this house is what led to their deaths. It's just heartbreaking to me. Now let's talk about the book itself in cold blood. I didn't realize till I started researching this week that there was so much controversy about the book. How did I miss that? Probably because I haven't thought about it in a while. But yeah, there was tons of controversy about this book. Here's what I found interesting, because I have always thought Jack Olson was the best true crime writer in the world. He was very upset about this book. Number one, because he wanted to write a book on it, and Capote beat him to it. Two, he feels like, and many people feel, that Capote put so much art and fantasy into the book that wasn't true. Now, Capote says every single thing in the book is true. Other people say no. He added dialogue that never happened. He added scenes that never happened. And of course, you go back to the controversy about Bonnie and her illness and whether he exaggerated that just for drama in the book. Here's a quote I found interesting by Jack Olson. I recognize it as a work of art, but I know fakery when I see it. Capote completely fabricated quotes and whole scenes. The book made something like $6 million in the 1960s money, and nobody wanted to discuss anything wrong with a moneymaker like that in the publishing business. Capote, of course, said that Jack Olson was just jealous. So Jack Olson says, well, of course I was jealous of all that money. I'd have been assigned the Clutter case by Harper and Row until we found out that Capote and his cousin Harper Lee had already been on the case in Dodge City for 6 months. His book did two things. It made true crime an interesting, successful commercial genre, but it also began the process of tearing it down. I blew the whistle on it in my own weak way. At that time, I'd only published a couple of books, but since it was such a superbly written book, nobody wanted to hear about it. The prosecutor in the case, Dwayne West, said that the story lacked so much because Capote didn't get the true hero. He said that the Richard, I hope I'm saying this right, Rodler, he was the one that took the pictures that changed everything in Kansas crime detection. He was the assistant chief of police, but he was also the photographer. People say he was way ahead of his time. He made his own fingerprint dusting tools. He had made his own lie detection machine. He was really on the cutting edge of crime detection at that time. People say the reason Capote wouldn't hardly write about this guy was because Richard Rodler didn't like gay people. Now, at that time, Capote was openly gay, which was unheard of back then. And you could imagine in a small Kansas town, it was even more unheard of. So he wasn't a fan of Capote's for the simple reason that Capote was gay. which we know is wrong, but back then you got to remember the time that you're in. So they say that's why Capote hardly puts him in the book, but they say he for sure is responsible for solving the crime because his pictures of the boot prints is what solved it. That's what led them to knowing that there was two criminals, not just one. Because when he developed the pictures, you could see the dusty boot print left by Smith, and they had the other boot print left by the other guy. So then they knew there was two different boot prints. They now call this way of taking pictures of a crime scene as bracketing. So this means that the photographer will take one photo at the proper exposure, then one longer and one shorter exposure on purpose, because that's what made that boot print in the dust show up. Now, other people say that Prosecutor West was good friends with Capote and loved his work until he tried to get him to sign a non-compete agreement so that he couldn't write his own book about the murders. And that's when he started talking bad about Capote. So see, some things just never change. Even back then, this stuff was going on just like it goes on today. Another thing I never realized was that it took 6 years to write In Cold Blood. Part of the problem was Capote wouldn't finish the book until the men were executed or not executed. He felt like the book couldn't have an ending until they were either taken off death row or they were executed. So that's why the book sat for so long, waiting for the ending to come. Oddly, Capote ended up being really good friends, really close with Smith. This I found so weird to me. He said that they could have been the same people. They could have been like brothers. I guess when he got to talking to him, they found so many similarities in their youth and growing up. Now, it's been hinted that there could have been a love affair between the two of them, but then other people say absolutely not, that it was just this feeling of kinship from having similar shared histories. Capote was quoted as saying once that after they grew up, he went out one door and Smith went out another door, and that was the only difference it made between the two of them. Capote was very against either one of them being put to death. He wrote with these guys, especially Smith, for years and years. All the time that they were waiting, he went and visited them in prison like every 3 months. So there was a real connection there with him and Perry Smith, there's no doubt. He said if he had a different childhood, things would have ended up so differently if he could have just painted. And so I guess Perry was like a creative person, an artistic person, but was never, able to express that. Capote also attended both of their hangings. I found it so odd that Smith had written to Capote. He had looked up a medical dictionary on hanging and how it works and how it kills a person, and he had sent it to Capote. I think he was playing on his sympathies, trying to get Capote to do more to try to get him off death row. Some people felt like Capote could have done more. He says he couldn't. It's kind of creepy, though, that he sent this detailed letter about what would happen to him when he was hung. And since he used a medical dictionary, it was all right on target of what was going to happen to him. It's been said that this upset Capote a lot since he was closer to Smith. So no good Halloween story is good without a good ending. So we're going to end with their hangings. The last meal that they ordered was jumbo deep fried shrimp, French fries, garlic bread, ice cream, and strawberry shortcake. How's that for a meal? They did not get to eat it together, though. They were kept in separate rooms and each had a chaplain. The last words of Hickok were, "You're sending me to a better place than this, and I don't bear any grudge against Church for his role in this case." He then shook hands and said goodbye. The last words of Smith were, "I think it's a hell of a thing that life has to be taken in this manner. I say this especially because there's a great deal I could have offered society. I certainly think capital punishment is legally and morally wrong. Any apology for what I have done would be meaningless at this time. I don't have any animosities towards anyone involved in this matter. I think that is all."